The Nevada desert had a way of swallowing sound. Out here, Specialist Emily Torres often felt like the last living soul on Earth. During the day, the sun blistered the earth until the ground cracked and shimmered, waves of heat rising and distorted. Ribbons. At night, the silence pressed in so tightly that even the whir of cicadas or the soft hum of the depot's floodlights seemed deafening. It was a lonely post, one many soldiers joked about drawing as punishment. For Emily, it wasn't a joke. This was her assignment, her duty, her reality. The ammunition depot stretched across a desolate patch of government land 40 miles outside of Fallon. Surrounded by chain-linked fencing topped with barbed wire, it looked unremarkable to anyone passing by, if anyone ever did. A cluster of squat concrete bunkers, painted in dull camouflage tones, sat half buried in sand like forgotten relics. Each one held enough firepower to outfit entire battalions. To Emily, they weren't just structures. They were responsibilities. Every box stacked inside, every log she signed, represented trust. And trust in the Army wasn't given lightly. She often wondered why she had been sent here. At 23, fresh out of advanced individual training, she had envisioned deployment. Overseas, maybe even stationed somewhere near the action she had trained for. Her peers had been assigned to Germany, Korea, the Middle East. Some had posted excited photos in uniform, their faces framed by far-off landmarks or base life abroad. Emily, on the other hand, had been assigned to the Nevada desert. "Congratulations," one of her sergeants had joked. "You've just won a front-row seat to tumbleweeds." At first, she laughed along. Later, when the reality set in, the humor drained away. This was not a glamorous job. She wasn't kicking down doors. She wasn't on patrol in dangerous villages. She wasn't even working alongside a busy unit. Most days, her company commander barely remembered she was out here. That anonymity stung, but she carried it like armor. Her father's words stayed with her. Every job in uniform matters, no matter how invisible it feels. Her father, Sergeant Miguel Torres, had served in the Gulf War. He rarely spoke of the battlefield, but he spoke constantly of duty. He told her stories about soldiers who kept aircraft running, who ensured supply chains never faltered, who stood lonely watches in places no one remembered until things went wrong. "The people no one notices are the ones holding the line," he'd say. Emily absorbed those lessons. Maybe that was why, even on her loneliest nights, she stayed sharp, rifle slung, eyes scanning the perimeter. Her shift often began before sunset, when the sky was painted in streaks of fire and gold. As the desert cooled, shadows stretched long, and coyotes howled in the distance. The depot came alive in small ways. The floodlights hummed. The radios clicked with scheduled check-ins. The security cameras blinked. Emily made her rounds, boots crunching on gravel. She checked the gates, tested the locks, ran her flashlight. Beam across the fence line. To an outsider, it might have looked monotonous, but to her, each task carried weight. One loose bolt, one unreported breach, could spell disaster. Still, the monotony wore on her. She sometimes found herself staring at the endless horizon, imagining the lives her friends were living overseas. The camaraderie, the adrenaline, the stories they'd tell when they came back. Her own stories felt less like adventures and more like diary entries about windstorms and paperwork. She wanted to matter in a way she could feel, not just believe. One night, she caught herself whispering aloud, "Does anyone even care if I'm here?" Her voice disappeared into the desert air, unanswered. But Emily didn't realize people did care. Quietly, far above her pay grade, eyes had turned to her little outpost. The depot she guarded wasn't just a storage site. It was a keystone in a larger chain of logistics supporting special operations overseas. Every shell, every magazine, Every grenade stored in these bunkers had a purpose beyond the desert. With outposts like hers, SEALs and Rangers would run dry in firefights thousands of miles away. She didn't know it yet, but her work had already saved lives she would never meet. That evening, as Emily stood at her post, the wind carried a faint rumble across the desert. At first, she thought it was thunder. Storms sometimes rolled in fast, sweeping across the flatlands with little warning. But the sound grew steadier, more mechanical. Headlights flickered on the far horizon, cutting through the twilight haze. She stiffened. No vehicles were scheduled. Her gut tightened as she brought her rifle closer, eyes narrowing against the glare. A convoy, dark silhouettes. Too organized to be random travelers. Emily's heart pounded. Protocol drilled into her. MIND, unidentified vehicles required challenge procedures. She reached for her radio, calling in the sighting to base. Static answered. She tried again, nothing. The desert swallowed her transmission. She clenched her jaw. This wasn't the first time the radios failed, but of all nights, why now? Headlights drew nearer, revealing sleek, black SUVs moving in tight formation. Not army trucks, not local ranchers. Something else. Dust swirled around them as they slowed at the outer gate, engines rumbling low, purposeful. Emily's training screamed at her to remain calm. She planted her boots, raised her weapon in a ready but non-threatening posture, and prepared to challenge. Whoever stepped out, her mind raced. Could this be an inspection? A mistake? Or something worse? The driver's door of the lead SUV opened. Out stepped a tall figure, broad-shouldered, moving with unmistakable military precision. His uniform was different desert fatigues, but with a Navy insignia glinting faintly in the floodlight glow. Emily's stomach flipped. Navy? Out here? He walked with the steady confidence of someone used to command, his eyes scanning everything, the fence line, the bunker doors, her stance. Emily tightened her grip on her rifle. The figure's presence carried weight, like a storm pressing down before lightning struck. Whoever he was, he didn't come here by accident. For months, Emily had felt invisible in this desert, a ghost, guarding forgotten steel. But tonight, under the stars and the hum of the depot lights, something had shifted. Someone important had come, and by the look in his eyes, he was here for her. The convoy's engines idled at the outer fence, their low rumble vibrating through the desert floor like distant thunder. Specialist Emily Torres steadied her breath, rifle angled against her shoulder in a guarded but non-aggressive stance. Every muscle in her body felt tight, coiled like a spring. She had rehearsed scenarios like this 1,000 times in training, but training was just drills. This was real. Unscheduled visitors, armed and deliberate, moving like they belonged here. Her hand hovered near the radio again. Static. She bit down frustration. The depot's communication system had a habit of failing at the worst times. But tonight, it felt like fate was testing her. Alone, no backup in sight, she was the first line of defense between these men and the arsenal behind her. The tall man from the lead SUV approached the fence slowly, as though giving her time to assess him. He wasn't reckless. He knew exactly what she was trained to do: challenge, verify, escalate if necessary. Even from a distance, Emily noted the precision of his gait. He didn't walk like a politician on a base tour or a desk officer inspecting the troops. He walked like a fighter, every step deliberate, balanced. When the floodlight caught the insignia on his uniform, Emily's pulse spiked. Navy. A trident pin gleamed faintly on his chest. That symbol wasn't just decoration, it was recognition, forged in brutal training that broke most men. A Navy. SEALs stood at her gate. But why? This was an Army depot, miles from the nearest naval installation. Her voice, when she finally called out, was steady despite the adrenaline burning in her veins. "Halt! Identify yourself." The man stopped exactly where he should, just outside the secured entry zone. His tone carried both authority and respect. "Commander Jack Rawlins, United States Navy. Requesting entry." "Commander." Emily's heart raced. She'd never spoken directly to an officer above captain, much less one with this kind of reputation. Still, procedure came first. "Sir, this is an Army facility. No visits are scheduled. I'll need to verify your credentials before any clearance." A faint smile ghosted across his lips. He seemed almost impressed by her firmness. "Understood, Specialist. Do your job." He slowly reached into his uniform pocket, producing a leather case. Inside was an identification badge, gleaming under the harsh light. Emily studied it carefully, matching names, insignia, and holographic seals against her training manuals etched into memory. It was real. No hesitation. She exhaled slowly, but didn't lower her weapon. Protocol demanded more. "Sir, please, state your purpose." His eyes met hers steady, unreadable, as if he could see straight through her. "I'm here to inspect your facility and meet the soldier assigned to protect it." Emily blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Meet her? Why would a SEAL commander care about a lone specialist at an ammunition depot? Inspections were conducted by logistics officers, not elite warriors. Something about his presence didn't align with routine. Still, procedure was procedure. She called in the request one more time, hoping the radio would miraculously cooperate. Static again. Her grip tightened on the handset. If anything went wrong, she was on her own. Rawlins waited without impatience, hands clasped loosely behind his back. His men stayed by their vehicles, disciplined silhouettes against the headlights. They didn't fidget, didn't speak. They stood like statues, radiating the quiet menace of men who knew violence intimately but didn't need to flaunt it. Emily swallowed, squared her shoulders, and made her decision. "Sir, I'll escort you inside for verification. You and one additional member only. The rest must remain at the gate until clearance is confirmed." For a split second, she wondered if he'd resist, throw his weight as a commander to override her. Instead, Rawlins nodded once. Fair and professional. "Proceed." He motioned to a younger man, who joined him silently. Together, they followed Emily toward the security checkpoint. Every step she took, she felt their presence behind her, a reminder that she was leading men who had likely seen more combat in 1 year than she might in her entire career. Yet here, at this moment, she was in charge. The irony didn't escape her. At the inner gate, Emily initiated the verification process. Scanners hummed, lights flickered, locks disengaged with heavy clanks. The desert stillness seemed to deepen as the doors creaked open. Inside lay rows of concrete bunkers, stretching into the distant silent, brooding giants under the floodlights. Rawlins stepped forward slightly, his eyes scanning the layout. With a professional's gaze, he wasn't sightseeing. He was assessing angles, vulnerabilities, coverage. Emily noticed how his gaze lingered on the blind spots she'd identified weeks ago, the ones she reported but never received fixes for. It unnerved her how quickly he saw them. "Efficient layout," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, turning to her, "How long have you been posted here, Specialist Torres?" 8 months, sir." "Alone?" "Rotations," she corrected. Quickly, but mostly, "Yes, sir." He studied her, as though weighing her answer. 8 months of watching crates in the desert. His tone wasn't dismissive. It was something else, probing, curious. Emily held his gaze. "Yes, sir. Every night, every crate matters." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to her surprise, Rawlins gave a slight nod. Approval? She couldn't be sure. He gestured to the nearest bunker. Walk me through your routine. Emily hesitated only briefly before leading him inside. The cool air enveloped them, a sharp contrast to the dry heat outside. She explained the process: log checks, lock inspections, temperature monitoring, armed patrols. Rollins listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions. His young aide scribbled notes without speaking. Emily expected skepticism, maybe even condescension. Instead, Rollins seemed genuinely invested. He asked about her patrol routes, her backup procedures, her improvisations when equipment failed. She explained how she'd created a manual redundancy system when the sensors glitched, ensuring no entry went unrecorded. When she finished, Rollins stood quietly for a moment, then spoke. "Specialist, do you know why SEALs succeed where others fail?" Emily hesitated. "Training, sir? Training helps. So does courage. But the truth?" He leaned slightly closer, his voice steady. "We succeed because when it matters, someone like you made sure we're never without what we need. Ammo, gear, support. People underestimate posts like this." "I don't." His words struck like a bolt. Emily's throat tightened, though she fought to keep her composure. Months of loneliness, of wondering if her job mattered, suddenly felt different. Here was a man who had lived missions, who had seen lives on the line, and he was telling her that her role was indispensable. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The interior of the ammunition depot smelled faintly of gunpowder and metal polish. Emily led Commander Jack Rollins down narrow corridors between concrete bunkers, each heavy door sealed tight, each crate meticulously logged. Her footsteps echoed against the concrete floor, a rhythmic beat that seemed louder than usual in the quiet. Behind her, the SEAL commander's presence carried weight. It wasn't oppressive or threatening. It was the quiet certainty of a man who had seen war and survived, a man whose evaluation could change her life without a single word. Her heart thudded as she demonstrated the inventory process. Every crate had a barcode and a manual log entry. She scanned the codes and showed him how she cross-checked each item against shipping manifests and operational schedules. "This crate, for instance," she explained, pointing to a stack of small arms ammunition, was scheduled for deployment to Fort Bragg last week. I confirmed its delivery and updated the logs accordingly. The system flagged a minor discrepancy. In weight, I investigated and verified the contents. Rollins watched silently, his expression unreadable. Emily felt a flicker of doubt. Was she doing enough? She had been meticulous, but the commander's eyes were sharp, scanning every corner, assessing every nuance of her routine. One misstep could ruin her record. "You've adapted the protocols," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "That's good. Initiative. Not everyone notices anomalies or takes the time to correct them." "How often do you find discrepancies?" "Like this? Once or twice a week, sir," Emily admitted. "Mostly minor, but I document everything." He nodded slowly. "And the security patrols? Tell me how you structure them." She outlined her routes, how she staggered the timing to cover blind spots, how she alternated checkpoints during the night to prevent predictability. She explained the redundancies she'd set up when motion sensors failed, how she manually checked cameras and gates. Every word came from months of experience, yet speaking it aloud to someone of his caliber made her nervous. Rollins's gaze followed her, unflinching. "You've thought this through," he said finally. "Not many do. You're meticulous, vigilant, reliable." Emily blinked. His words weren't just praise. They were assessment. In her mind, she had always doubted herself, wondering if this post was a waste of her time. Now, for the first time, a man who had lived in firefights, who had relied on precise logistics to survive, told her she mattered. She guided him toward the first of the bunkers, unlocking the steel door with a practiced click. Inside, the air was cool, almost crisp, a sharp contrast to the dry heat outside. The crates were stacked neatly, labels facing outward, documentation in perfect order. Emily explained the security protocols for each section, how she monitored temperature-sensitive munitions and checked seals for tampering. Rollins moved deliberately, inspecting every crate, every lock, every security measure. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't patronizing. He was evaluating and listening. "Specialist," he said finally, after a long pause, "tell me how you feel about being here." The question caught her off guard. She hesitated. "Sir, at first, it felt lonely, monotonous. I questioned whether my work mattered." She paused, unsure if she should confess the full truth. Then she added, "But I know it's important. Every crate, every log. Someone depends on it, and that's why I stay vigilant." Rollins regarded her silently for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "Good answer, and honest. I like honesty in my team. It shows self-awareness." Emily's throat tightened. She had never thought of herself as part of a team. Out here, it felt like isolation. Her actions mattered only to the system, to regulations, to unseen commanders. But Rollins's words hinted that her role had real human consequences. They moved to the next bunker. This one contained heavier ordnance grenades, rocket launchers, ammunition crates, bound for distant deployments. Emily's hands moved confidently, opening doors, showing serial numbers, checking seals. Rollins observed quietly. Occasionally, he asked precise questions about procedures, about potential vulnerabilities, about how she would respond if alarms failed. Emily answered without hesitation, feeling a mix of pride and nervous energy. "You've built redundancy into your routine," Rollins noted. "That's the mark of a soldier who understands risk. Most people do the minimum. You're doing more, much more." Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. Recognition from him was unlike any praise she had received before. This wasn't a trivial commendation from a company commander or a casual nod. From a sergeant, it carried the weight of operational knowledge, experience earned in the most dangerous theaters. As they continued the tour, Emily found herself explaining small improvisations she had made, like manually cross-checking temperature logs for sensitive explosives and noting any anomalies in the automated surveillance system. She had never thought these details would matter, but here, under Rollins's gaze, they seemed significant. He nodded occasionally, jotting notes, listening intently. "Specialist Torres," he said, as they paused in a quiet corner of the bunker. "Do you ever feel overlooked?" Emily hesitated. She had rehearsed answers for routine inspections, but not this. "Sometimes, sir," she admitted quietly. "I know this post is important, but it feels forgotten. Most people don't realize what goes on here. They think we're guarding boxes, not lives." Rollins's eyes softened slightly. "I see that, and that's why I'm here." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. "Sir? I'm here because what you're doing is essential. People like you make sure others survive. SEALs, Rangers, infantry, they rely on posts like yours, whether they realize it or not. Every mission starts long before boots hit the ground, and you are the unseen foundation." Emily blinked. She had never imagined someone of his experience would see her work that way. Months of doubt, of loneliness, of wondering whether she mattered, were suddenly challenged by the weight of his words. Rollins paused, looking around the bunker. "Your diligence prevents chaos. Your vigilance ensures readiness. You are, in effect, the first line of defense for every operation dependent on these supplies. That's why your role is invaluable. Never doubt it." For a moment, the desert outside, the crates, the flickering fluorescent lights, all of it faded into insignificance. Emily felt something she hadn't in months: validation. Real, meaningful recognition. She was part of a chain that saved lives, even if she never saw the battlefield herself. Rollins studied her for a long beat. You've trained yourself to anticipate failure before it happens. That's rare. That's exceptional. And it doesn't go unnoticed, not by people who matter. The young aide accompanying him scribbled notes silently, but Emily knew the significance wasn't in the note-taking. The message was clear. Someone of his caliber had noticed her, understood her, and valued her. As they concluded the tour of the bunkers, Emily felt a quiet resolve settle over her. For months, she had felt invisible. For months, the night shifts and endless logs had seemed meaningless. Now, with a SEAL commander's acknowledgement, she began to understand her importance. Her watch, her diligence, her every decision, it mattered more than she had realized. Outside, the desert was cooling, the stars beginning to pierce the deep indigo sky. Floodlights shimmered across the metal roofs of the depot. Emily felt an unfamiliar surge of pride. This was her post, her responsibility. And for the first time, she knew she could carry it without doubt, without the ache of feeling unseen. Rollins glanced at her one final time. Specialist, I'll need to observe your night patrols soon. But know this: your attention to detail, your initiative, your integrity, it doesn't go unnoticed. You are the backbone of this operation. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. Thank you, sir, she said. It felt inadequate, but it was all she could manage. As the SEAL commander and his aide prepared to leave the depot for the evening, Emily stood in the doorway of the final bunker, watching them disappear into the desert night. Her pulse had slowed, but her mind raced. She realized, fully for the first time, that her assignment, once a monotonous post at the edge of nowhere, was part of something far greater than she had imagined. And tonight, that understanding had changed everything. The sun had dipped below the jagged Nevada mountains, leaving streaks of burnt orange across the horizon. The desert air cooled, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. Emily Torres adjusted her patrol jacket, the fabric stiff and heavy, feeling the weight of her rifle across her shoulder. She had walked these corridors 1,000 times, but tonight felt different. A presence lingered behind her that made every step more deliberate, every glance sharper. Commander Jack Rollins wasn't just here to inspect. He was evaluating, watching, measuring her, as she could feel it in her bones. She led him and his aide toward a section of the depot she called the vaults, bunkers containing the heaviest ordnance, items restricted for extreme operations and high-level missions. Each door was reinforced with layers of steel and digital locks. Emily's pulse quickened. She had trained endlessly for this, but demonstrating access procedures to someone like Rollins carried an unspoken weight. Any misstep, any hesitation, could betray inexperience. The first bunker door loomed ahead. Emily entered the access code, her fingers moving with muscle memory. The locks clicked in sequence, and the massive door swung open with a groan. Rollins stepped forward without hesitation, scanning the interior with sharp, deliberate movements. Emily followed, pointing out the organization of munitions, the inventory logs, and the measures she had taken to prevent theft or tampering. You maintain strict order, Rollins observed, his voice calm but precise. Most soldiers would just stack the crates and hope for the best. You anticipate problems before they happen. Emily swallowed. Sir, it's my responsibility. If one crate is out of place or damaged, it could compromise operations downrange. That's why I check everything, every day. He nodded slowly. Good. Attention to detail. Initiative. You understand that the smallest failures ripple outward. You understand why lives depend on this work. Emily felt her chest tighten. She had spent months doubting her purpose here, But hearing these words from a man who had operated in the world's most dangerous theaters made her heart race. Her watch mattered. Her diligence mattered. She was no longer just guarding crates. She was guarding lives. Rollins moved methodically around the bunker, inspecting seals on crates, testing locks, even tapping lightly on metal surfaces to detect imperfections. Emily followed his movements, describing every step she had taken to maintain security. He asked about backup procedures, redundancies, and responses to emergencies. She explained the manual overrides she had set up in case the automated systems failed, how she monitored temperatures for sensitive explosives, and how she logged every anomaly. The young aide scribbled notes silently, but Emily could sense Rollins's real interest was in her judgment and composure. He wasn't merely recording facts. He was assessing her ability to think clearly under pressure. "Specialist," he said after a long silence, "tell me about a time when something went wrong here." Emily hesitated. Mistakes were rare, but they happened. She recalled an incident a month ago when a shipment's weight didn't match the manifest. She had spent hours verifying the contents, cross-referencing serial numbers, and consulting with logistics officers via radio. The discrepancy had turned out to be a simple clerical error, but her attention prevented confusion that could have delayed operational missions. "I noticed a weight discrepancy on a shipment," she admitted. "I checked each crate, verified serial numbers, and updated the logs. If left unchecked, it could have caused delays for units relying on these munitions." Rollins's eyes met hers, unwavering. "That's the kind of vigilance that saves lives, Specialist. Most people wouldn't notice. Most wouldn't care." The compliment sent an unexpected surge of pride through her. She had trained her mind to anticipate failure, to double-check every detail. Yet recognition from someone like Rollins was rarer than any medal. Her role, once invisible to everyone, suddenly carried significance she had never felt. They moved to the next bunker, one containing specialized ordnance for extreme deployment missions. Emily's steps were deliberate, her voice calm as she described security protocols, temperature monitoring, and restricted access procedures. Rollins asked questions that tested her understanding of logistics, but more importantly, her judgment. Every answer she gave, every detail she recalled, reinforced the trust she had built through months of solitary vigilance. At one point, he paused in the doorway, looking past her at the desert beyond. As stars were emerging, cold points of light in the vast night sky. The desert was quiet, except for the soft hum of floodlights and distant winds. "You've been here alone a long time," he said softly. "That can wear on a soldier's mind." "How do you stay sharp?" Emily considered the question. "I focus on the details, sir. On procedure. On preventing mistakes. If I lose focus, even for a moment, something could go wrong. I remind myself that this job isn't about visibility. It's about responsibility. Lives depend on it, whether I see them or not." Rollins nodded slowly, as though absorbing her words, evaluating not just her technique, but her mindset. "Good. That perspective matters. Too many people equate heroism with action on the front line. The truth is, heroism can also be quiet, methodical, and unseen. You embody that. Remember it." Emily felt a weight lift and settle simultaneously. Strange mixture of relief, pride, and an almost overwhelming responsibility. She had longed for acknowledgement, for validation, but never expected it to feel so potent, so real. They continued through the bunker, and Rollins asked her about patrol routes, blind spots, and worst-case scenarios. Emily explained her contingency, plans, improvisations she had designed when equipment malfunctioned, and how she prepared for emergencies. Each explanation seemed to reinforce his quiet approval. He didn't praise recklessly, didn't nod to placate. He evaluated, he observed, he measured. You've built this post into more than a storage facility, he said finally, pausing. In the center of the bunker, you've built it into a secure operation, capable of withstanding both human error and unforeseen threats. That's rare. That's exceptional. And it doesn't go unnoticed. Emily's throat tightened. Months of doubt, of isolation, of feeling like her role was minor, were swept away by the weight of his words. Someone who had been in war zones, who had seen men fail and succeed under impossible circumstances, had noticed her. He valued her. Rollins leaned against a crate casually, studying her. Specialist Torres, I'll need to observe your night patrols soon, but understand this. Your attention to detail, your initiative, your integrity, it doesn't go unnoticed. You are the backbone of this operation. Without you, missions fail before they even start. Emily nodded, her eyes bright despite the fatigue of the day. Yes, sir, she said softly. Words seemed inadequate to express the rush of relief, pride, and purpose that filled her. As they exited the bunker, the desert night embraced them. Stars glittered above, the floodlights casting long shadows over the crates and concrete. Emily felt a renewed sense of ownership, of pride, of responsibility. She wasn't just a soldier in isolation. She was a critical link in a chain whose strength depended on her vigilance. Rollins gave her one final nod, a small but unmistakable gesture of approval. Stay sharp, specialist. You've earned it. And remember this, what you do here matters far more than you realize. As he and his aide prepared to leave, Emily watched them disappear into the desert night. Her pulse slowed, but her mind raced. Every check, every patrol, every careful record she had kept now carried, meaning she had never fully understood. She realized that her post, once mundane and lonely, was part of something far greater. And tonight, Commander Rollins had made her see it. For the first time, Emily felt invisible no longer. The desert night pressed in around the depot, heavy with stillness and the faint rustle of sand over gravel. Emily Torres adjusted the strap of her rifle, feeling the familiar weight against her shoulder, but tonight it felt different, less like a burden and more like a symbol. She had walked these lines 1,000 times, yet the presence of Commander Jack Rollins had transformed the ordinary into something monumental. Every crate, every lock, every log she maintained suddenly felt alive with significance. For the first time, her vigilance had an audience that truly mattered. Rollins followed closely behind, his flashlight cutting through the shadows as he observed the facility. He wasn't just inspecting or assessing. He was taking measure of her, silently acknowledging the work she had performed alone for months. Emily kept her pace steady, trying to appear casual, but inside, nerves tingled with a mix of pride and uncertainty. Would she meet his expectations? Could she maintain the professionalism he clearly demanded? They approached the central yard, where several key bunkers converged. Floodlights cast long shadows, creating an almost surreal landscape of steel and concrete. Rollins gestured to a nearby crate and paused. "Specialist Torres," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Do you understand why I'm here?" Emily blinked, surprised. "Sir, to inspect the depot, I assume." He shook his head slightly. "Not exactly." "Yes, I came to verify security and operational integrity, but I also came for a different reason. I came to thank you." Emily froze, uncertain if she had heard him correctly. "Thank me, sir?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper, caught somewhere between disbelief and curiosity. Rollins nodded. "Yes, I came to acknowledge the work you've done here, the hours you've spent alone, the diligence, the foresight, the attention to detail. You may not see it, specialist, but your actions have real consequences." Her throat tightened. Months of doubt, the nights of silence, the feeling of being invisible, the constant questions of whether her work mattered rushed back in an instant. And now, someone of his experience, someone who had survived missions where a single misstep cost lives, was telling her that she mattered. That her job, guarding crates in the middle of nowhere, had saved lives she would never know. Rollins stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with a gravity that made Emily straighten instinctively. Specialist, I've seen missions go sideways. Because supply lines failed. I've watched operators scramble without what they needed, lives hanging in the balance. If your work here hadn't been meticulous, those missions would have failed. People would have died. You prevented that. You are saving lives. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. Her hands tightened around her rifle unconsciously. She had trained herself for precision, for vigilance, for discipline, but no one had ever framed her contribution this way. Never. Sir, she managed to say, I don't know what to say. I never thought of my work like that. It just felt like duty. Rollins's expression softened. Duty is exactly what it is. But don't minimize it. The work you've done, the initiative you've shown, the systems you've built, these aren't minor details. They are the backbone of operations. They ensure readiness, survival, success. You are part of the chain, specialist, and without you, that chain would break. Emily's chest tightened further. She had spent months feeling unimportant, a shadow behind gates and floodlights. Now, in the quiet desert night, a CAL commander with decades of battlefield experience was showing her that she wasn't invisible. She mattered more than she had ever imagined. Rollins gestured to a nearby patrol route. Walk me through your night checks. I want to see your process from start to finish. Emily led the way, describing every detail. Perimeter rounds, sensor checks, lock inspections, redundancy procedures. Rollins observed silently, occasionally asking a pointed question that tested both her knowledge and her judgment. Each time, Emily answered with precision, her confidence growing as she realized she wasn't just performing rote tasks, she was demonstrating critical, life-saving expertise. At one point, Rollins paused near a camera installation. Tell me why you alternate patrol schedules, he asked. To prevent predictability, sir, Emily replied. If a breach occurred, I want to ensure it can't exploit patterns. Randomized timing reduces vulnerabilities. I also document every change in rotation to maintain accountability. Rollins studied her silently for a long moment. Impressive. Most people would overlook that. Most wouldn't even think to document it. Emily swallowed. Recognition had never felt so validating. Months of lonely nights and repetitive tasks suddenly felt purposeful. They continued their rounds until the farthest edge of the depot, where the most sensitive bunkers were located. Emily unlocked the final door and gestured for Rollins to enter. Inside, the air was cool, the lights soft, and the rows of munitions stood like silent sentinels. Rollins moved through the space, his hands brushing lightly over crate edges, his eyes scanning for anomalies. Emily explained her security protocols, redundancies, and emergency procedures. The young aide took notes, but Emily knew the real audience was Rollins. His nods were subtle but meaningful, his quiet observations more validating than words. Finally, he turned to her. Specialist Torres, I want you to understand something. You've done more than just guard supplies. You've ensured that operations, thousands of miles away, succeeded. You've prevented failures. You've saved lives, even if you never see the people impacted. That's rare. That's exceptional. And it doesn't go unnoticed. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to speak, to protest modestly, but no words came. Instead, she nodded, letting the weight of his acknowledgement sink in. He stepped closer. I've met many soldiers, many operators, but few I've encountered understand the real stakes like you do. You are precise, vigilant, disciplined, and accountable. You've earned my respect, Specialist. And on behalf of every person who depends on what you do, thank you. Emily's vision blurred slightly. Months of questioning her importance, of feeling small and unseen, evaporated in a rush of emotion. She had spent countless nights patrolling the depot under the indifferent gaze of the stars, wondering if anyone noticed. Now, a SEAL commander, not just any officer, but one who had seen combat, survived impossible odds, and commanded elite teams, was telling her that her work mattered. She finally found her voice. Thank you, sir. I've just been doing my job. Rollins shook his head. Your job is bigger than you think. Duty isn't always glamorous, but it is critical. Never forget that. The stars above seemed brighter as they exited the bunker. The desert wind swept across the yard, and Emily felt an unfamiliar lightness. She had been invisible, unrecognized, and isolated for months, but that had ended tonight. Her vigilance had earned acknowledgement, and with it, a new sense of pride and purpose. As Rollins and his aide prepared to leave, he gave her a final nod of respect. Stay vigilant, Specialist. The work you do here is vital. Don't ever doubt it. Emily watched the convoy disappear into the desert night, engines fading into the distance. She felt the weight of her responsibilities. Yes, but also the affirmation that her efforts mattered. The depot, once a lonely and monotonous post, had become a symbol of her impact, and she understood now that her diligence could make the difference between life and death. For the first time in months, Emily felt fully seen. The desert night pressed cool against Emily Torres's face as she adjusted the strap of her rifle, boots crunching over gravel that glimmered faintly under the depot's floodlights. Tonight was different. Normally, her patrols were solitary. A rhythm of silent footsteps, the occasional hum of generators, and the occasional rustle of desert wildlife. But tonight, Commander Jack Rollins walked silently behind her, observing every movement. She could feel the weight of his presence, not oppressive, but precise, assessing, measuring her discipline, her judgment, her focus. Emily's pulse quickened, but she reminded herself to stay steady. Every step, every check mattered more than usual. She led the way toward the northern perimeter, her flashlight sweeping in arcs, scanning the fence line and the steel barriers. Small imperfections, loose gravel, a bent fence link, a flickering light were magnified in her mind as Rollins's gaze followed each sweep. Maintain your spacing, he said calmly, walking in a manner that mirrored her own patrol routine. Timing, rhythm, consistency, these are as important as the weapon you carry. Yes, sir, she replied, aware that every movement was under scrutiny. Normally, her patrol was routine, almost second nature. But under Rollins' eyes, she became acutely conscious of every detail. As they reached the first checkpoint, Emily performed her standard scan of the perimeter cameras, testing locks and verifying the operational status of the motion sensors. Normally, this was mundane. Tonight, it was a demonstration, a performance, under evaluation. Yet, she noticed how his eyes didn't drift. He observed her process with keen attention, making occasional notes and asking precise questions. You anticipate sensor failure, he commented, his tone flat but approving. Good. Most would simply rely on the system and overlook minor irregularities. You've learned to see what isn't immediately visible. Emily's chest swelled with pride. Months of lone patrols, endless checks, and solitary vigilance suddenly felt validated. Her work was not invisible. It mattered profoundly, and the realization bolstered her confidence as they moved down the line. They rounded the corner to the second checkpoint, where high-value crates were stored in reinforced bunkers. Emily demonstrated her procedure for verifying crate integrity and updating the logs, showing the meticulous system she had developed to prevent discrepancies. Rollins watched in silence, his presence both comforting and intimidating. She knew he had faced situations where a single error had cost lives. Knowing this, she felt the stakes more acutely than ever. "You've built redundancy into every stage," he said quietly. "Not just the locks and cameras, but the process itself. That's exceptional. Most soldiers overlook the process they act. They hope. You ensure nothing is left to chance." Emily's fingers tightened on her rifle. This acknowledgement, coming from a man who had survived impossible missions, filled her with both pride and a sense of responsibility she had never felt before. The patrol continued along the western perimeter, where sand dunes rose like silent sentinels against the night sky. The wind carried the faint smell of sagebrush, and distant howls of coyotes punctuated the quiet. Emily's senses were heightened, not just for her own security, but for the knowledge that someone else's trust, the lives of countless operators depending on this depot, rested on her vigilance. Rollins followed, without comment for several minutes, then finally asked, "Specialist, what's your protocol if someone attempts unauthorized entry?" Emily demonstrated the procedure: immediate visual identification, radio contact with the central post, engagement only if necessary, and full documentation. She explained contingencies for system failures, backup patrols, and emergency lockdown procedures. Rollins nodded at each step, his eyes never leaving her movements. "Impressive," he said at last. "You've internalized these protocols not as rules, but as lifelines. Most people do the minimum. You do what's necessary, and more. That makes all the difference." They moved to the far corner of the depot, where a minor section of fencing showed slight wear from wind erosion. Emily knelt to inspect it, adjusting the metal support and ensuring it was secure. Rollins watched closely, occasionally tapping his notes. "Specialist Torres," he said, "this is what separates competence from excellence. Attention to details no one else notices. Foresight to anticipate failure before it happens. That's why your post is more than a duty. It's a mission-critical position." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She had trained herself to maintain vigilance, to anticipate threats, and to operate in isolation, but to hear that her work directly impacted operational success, that it could save lives, struck her deeply. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, barely able to keep her composure. I just do my job." Rollins shook his head slightly. "No, you do more than your job. You are the reason operations succeed before the first step is taken on the battlefield. Every crate, every patrol, every record you maintain is part of a chain that determines life or death. Do not underestimate your impact." They continued along the perimeter, and Emily's confidence began to grow. Each inspection became more fluid, more precise, as she internalized Rollins' words. She realized that her diligence, long carried out in isolation, had purpose beyond her immediate awareness. She was part of something larger, something vital, and she understood that her vigilance had life or death consequences. At the southern gate, they paused, looking out over the expansive desert, illuminated by floodlights. The night sky glittered with stars, and the quiet hum of the depot seemed almost sacred. Rollins finally spoke again. "Specialist, you've spent months here alone, unseen, unnoticed. That can wear on a soldier's mind, yet you've maintained discipline, initiative, and composure. That is rare, exceptional, and it doesn't go unnoticed anymore." Emily exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a shield. She had spent months questioning her importance, doubting whether her work mattered. Now she understood. It did. Every patrol, every log, every minute of solitary vigilance contributed to missions, lives, and outcomes beyond her sight. As they walked back toward the central depot, Rollins nodded toward her. "Stay vigilant, Specialist. You've earned the trust of every operator who depends on this facility. And remember, excellence isn't about recognition. It's about integrity, foresight, and reliability. You embody that." Emily's heart swelled with pride. For the first time, her duties felt heroic, not in a loud, battlefield sense, but in the quiet, relentless, life-preserving way that mattered most. She realized that her role, long dismissed as mundane, was indispensable. She was the foundation on which countless missions rested. The patrol ended at the depot's central yard. Rollins gave her a final nod of approval. "Well done, Specialist." "Torres, very well done." As he and his aide prepared to leave, Emily watched the convoy fade into the distance, headlights disappearing into the desert night. Her pulse slowed, but a quiet determination took root. She had been invisible, unnoticed, isolated, but no longer. Her vigilance mattered, her work had purpose, and her commitment had earned the respect of someone whose opinion carried weight beyond measure. For the first time in months, Emily felt not just seen, but essential. The solitude of the desert no longer felt like confinement. It felt like responsibility, purpose, and pride. She understood now that every patrol, every log, every crate she protected was a life preserved, a mission sustained, and an impact immeasurable. The night stretched on, but Emily walked the depot with renewed focus. Shadows still whispered across the sand, the hum of generators filled the air, and distant coyotes called into the darkness. Yet she no longer walked alone in purpose or spirit. She was part of a chain unseen, unheralded, yet indispensable. And for the first time, she embraced it fully. The desert dawn had begun to paint the horizon in muted golds and soft purples when Emily Torres returned to the depot after her patrol. Her boots crunched against the gravel, echoing faintly beneath the early morning light. The night's work had passed with no incidents, a testament to her discipline and vigilance, but Emily still felt the residue of adrenaline. Last night had been different. Commander Rollins had watched her, evaluated her, and left her with words that burned. Like a promise, her work mattered. As she approached the main yard, she noticed a subtle change. The depot, usually a quiet, almost deserted landscape of concrete bunkers and metal crates, had more movement than usual. Several Army personnel, typically engaged in routine inspections or paperwork, were gathered in small clusters. Emily's curiosity flickered with unease. Was something wrong? Rollins emerged from one of the SUVs, parked near the depot's entrance, the early light glinting off his insignia. He didn't walk toward the bunkers as usual. Instead, he gestured toward the assembled soldiers. Emily froze. "Specialist Torres." He called out, his voice firm but warm. "Come forward, please." Emily stepped forward cautiously, her heartbeat quickening. The soldiers' chatter quieted as she approached. Rollins looked at her with a steady, approving gaze. "This morning, we are here to acknowledge a soldier whose work has been extraordinary. Specialist Torres has maintained this ammunition depot with exceptional vigilance, discipline, and foresight for months. Her efforts have ensured that missions dependent on these supplies succeeded. Lives have been preserved because of her diligence." A murmur of respect rippled through the gathered soldiers. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had been invisible for months, her work unseen by most. Now, in the desert morning, standing before her peers and a Navy SEAL commander, she felt the weight of recognition settle upon her. Rollins continued, "Specialist Torres has gone beyond the call of duty. She has created redundancies, maintained impeccable records, and safeguarded critical munitions without oversight or supervision. Her vigilance ensures operational readiness at all times. That is not something we take lightly." Emily's throat tightened. She had never considered herself exceptional. She had simply done her job, believing that diligence was its own reward. Hearing these words, knowing that someone with his experience had witnessed her work and valued it, brought a rush of pride and humility she could barely articulate. On behalf of the units that rely on this depot, Rollins said, and on behalf of every operator whose life depends on your vigilance, thank you. You are a soldier who exemplifies the highest standards of duty, integrity, and responsibility. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, polished case. Emily's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a certificate of commendation. This is not given lightly, he said. It represents recognition of work that is rarely acknowledged but critical. Specialist Torres, you have earned it. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the certificate. She looked at it in disbelief. Months of lonely nights, endless patrols, meticulous documentation, and constant vigilance distilled into a tangible symbol of appreciation. The desert wind seemed to pause around her, carrying with it a sense of solemnity and importance she had never felt on this post before. Rollins continued, "Let this serve as a reminder that every action, no matter how unseen, can have profound consequences. You are part of a chain that saves lives, Specialist, and you have upheld it with excellence." The gathered soldiers broke into applause. Emily's eyes scanned the faces of her peers, seeing respect where previously there had been indifference. Some nodded, acknowledging the courage and consistency it took to maintain a post that many dismissed as routine. Others smiled, impressed by the quiet strength it took to sustain vigilance in solitude. Emily finally found her voice. "Thank you, sir. I've only done what I was trained to do." Rollins shook his head, a faint smile on his face. "No, Specialist. You have done more than what you were trained to do. You've taken responsibility seriously. You've protected lives. You've exceeded expectations." The young aide stepped forward with a camera to record the moment, capturing Emily holding the certificate with Rollins standing beside her. Emily felt a strange mixture of pride and humility. She had never imagined that her solitary post in the Nevada desert could carry such weight. After the brief ceremony, Rollins turned to her alone. "Specialist, I want you to understand something beyond the certificate. Recognition is temporary. Validation is fleeting. But integrity, vigilance, and diligence, those are enduring. You have demonstrated all three. Never underestimate the impact of your work, even when it feels invisible. You have changed outcomes, preserved lives, and exemplified what it means to serve." Emily nodded, swallowing hard. His words carried more weight than any medal or commendation. They affirmed the months of quiet discipline she had undertaken, and the significance of the sacrifices she had made in solitude. As Rollins and his team prepared to depart, Emily walked beside him for a few moments. "Sir, will you return?" she asked, hesitant. "To observe? To ensure the standards?" He smiled faintly. "I may return, Specialist, but know this: your work has already been observed, evaluated, and acknowledged. You've proven your capabilities beyond question." Emily felt a swell of determination rise in her chest. She realized that her confidence, once fragile and tentative, had solidified. She could patrol, inspect, and maintain this depot, not just as a duty, but as a mission with life or death stakes, and she could do so knowing that her vigilance mattered. The convoy drove away, engines fading into the distance, leaving Emily alone once more in the quiet desert. Yet this time, the solitude felt different. The desert was still silent, the wind still whispered, and the floodlights still cast long shadows across the crates and bunkers. But Emily no longer felt invisible. She was no longer just a lone guardian. She was a soldier acknowledged, a vital link in a chain of life-preserving work, and a soldier whose discipline and vigilance had earned the respect of those whose lives depended on her efforts. As the sun continued its slow climb over the desert horizon, Emily stood in the central yard, certificate in hand, feeling a profound sense of purpose. Every step she would take, every patrol she would conduct, and every log she would maintain carried renewed significance. She understood that recognition was more than a fleeting moment. It was the validation of dedication, the acknowledgement of excellence, and the affirmation that even the most solitary posts could change the outcome of critical missions. For the first time in months, Emily felt fully confident in her role. The depot, once merely a collection of crates and bunkers, had become a symbol of her impact, and she embraced the responsibility with pride. She knew that her diligence would continue to save lives, protect missions, and exemplify the highest standards of military service. And with that understanding, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond commendations. It was the quiet, enduring satisfaction of a job done with unwavering integrity. The sun had climbed higher over the Nevada desert, casting long shadows across the depot's concrete bunkers and metal crates. Emily Torres walked the central yard with measured steps, rifle secured across her shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon, with a confidence she hadn't felt months ago. The morning's acknowledgement ceremony still lingered in her mind, the certificate in her hand, Commander Rawlins' words echoing, the respect of her peers imprinted in her memory. Today, the depot felt different. It wasn't just a post. It was her domain, a testament to her discipline, vigilance, and unyielding dedication. Months of solitude, nights spent walking the same gravel paths, and endless inspections had once left her feeling invisible. Every patrol had been accompanied by the quiet hum of generators and the occasional whisper of the desert wind. The weight of responsibility had been heavy, but also isolating. She had questioned her significance, doubted the impact of her meticulous work, and wondered if anyone ever noticed. And then Commander Jack Rawlins arrived. A SEAL commander with years of combat experience, a man whose life depended on operational precision, had observed her, evaluated her, and recognized her contributions. His words, delivered under the desert night sky, had shattered months of self-doubt. Her diligence, attention to detail, and foresight had saved lives. As she walked toward the northern perimeter for her first solo patrol since the ceremony, Emily felt a surge of purpose. Each step was deliberate, each sweep of her flashlight precise, and each lock she inspected carried a renewed weight. She understood now that her vigilance was not routine. It was mission-critical. Lives of operators, often unknown to her, depended on her diligence. The crates she had once seen as mere containers of metal and gunpowder were vessels of survival, and she was their guardian. She approached the first checkpoint, scanning the perimeter cameras, checking sensors, and verifying the integrity of fencing and locks. Months of training had taught her efficiency and precision, but the events of the past days had transformed routine into purpose. Rawlins' words had embedded in her a deeper understanding. Excellence in isolation mattered more than she had ever realized. Emily paused at the edge of the yard, letting her eyes sweep over the vast expanse of desert surrounding the depot. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and the faint hum of generators. It was quiet, almost sacred, and she felt connected, not just to her post, but to the chain of operations her work supported. She understood now that every precaution, every redundancy, every careful log entry was part of a life-saving system stretching far beyond the desert horizon. Her thoughts wandered back to the nights when doubts gnawed at her. The solitude had been oppressive. She had wondered if her vigilance mattered, if the hours spent patrolling, inspecting, and documenting were wasted. She remembered feeling invisible, a cog in a machine no one noticed, isolated in a world of crates and concrete bunkers. And yet, through that isolation, she had forged precision, discipline, and integrity. The patrol continued along the perimeter. Emily moved with fluid confidence, checking locks, scanning cameras, and testing motion sensors. Her hands moved instinctively, her mind alert to every potential anomaly. Each crate, each bunker, each shadow cast by the desert floodlights was part of the mission she now fully understood. Her responsibility extended beyond herself. It encompassed every operator, every mission, every life that depended on this depot. As she reached the southern edge, Emily paused, listening to the soft whispers of the desert wind. She remembered the moment Rollins had formally acknowledged her work, the certificate in her hands, and the respectful nods of her peers. That recognition had not just validated her efforts, it had transformed them. Solitude was no longer a burden. It was her proving ground, a crucible that had forged her vigilance into excellence. The depot seemed alive in a way she had never perceived before. Every crate, every lock, every sensor was part of a living system, and she was the central point of control. She understood now that heroism was not always loud or visible. It was quiet, methodical, and steadfast. Her work had saved lives, maintained operational readiness, and ensured the success of missions she would never witness. And she had done it alone, with unwavering discipline. Emily's thoughts drifted to Commander Rollins. His presence had been commanding yet respectful, challenging yet affirming. He had seen what she did in isolation and understood its significance. His acknowledgement had been more than ceremonial. It had been transformative. She realized that leadership was not only about commanding others, but also about recognizing excellence where it often went unnoticed. As she completed her patrol, Emily approached the final checkpoint near the vaults. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and confident. Every action, every inspection was executed with the knowledge that her vigilance mattered. She paused, running her hand over the secure doors, feeling the cold metal under her fingers. It was a tactile reminder that she was not just guarding crates. She was guarding lives, ensuring the continuity of operations that stretched far beyond the desert. The sun had climbed higher, casting sharper shadows across the yard when Emily finished her rounds. She stood in the center of the depot, taking in the concrete bunkers, the organized crates, and the perimeter she had patrolled countless times. There was pride in her posture, a quiet satisfaction in her heart, and a profound sense of purpose that had once seemed elusive. For the first time, Emily understood the full impact of her dedication. She had walked in shadows and silence, unseen, yet indispensable. She had forged discipline and vigilance into a life-saving force. And she had been acknowledged not just by words, but by the respect of a commander who had survived what few could endure. Her thoughts lingered on the certificate she had received, tucked securely in her jacket. It was a symbol, yes, but the true reward was the realization that her work mattered. She was not a cog in an unseen machine. She was the foundation upon which success depended. Her efforts had tangible consequences, saving lives and sustaining missions. Emily adjusted her rifle, feeling its reassuring weight. She walked toward the eastern perimeter, scanning the desert for anomalies, inspecting sensors, and verifying security measures. Each action was deliberate, precise, and imbued with purpose. She understood now that her vigilance, though quiet and unseen, was heroic in its own right. As the day warmed the desert, Emily paused at the central yard once more. The depot, which had once felt like a lonely and isolating post, now radiated significance. Each bunker, each crate, each shadow held meaning. She understood the magnitude of her role, the life-saving importance of her vigilance, and the profound responsibility she carried. For Emily Torres, the solitude of the desert no longer represented isolation. It represented purpose, duty, and a quiet form of heroism. She had walked in darkness and emerged seen, acknowledged, and transformed. She was no longer just a specialist. Assigned to guard crates, she was a guardian, a sentinel, A soldier whose unwavering dedication made a difference beyond measure. As the sun rose fully over the Nevada desert, Emily stood tall, her rifle at the ready, eyes scanning the horizon. The wind whispered across the sand, carrying with it the weight of countless missions, lives saved, and the quiet knowledge that her work mattered. In that moment, she understood fully. She was not invisible. She was indispensable, and she would continue to serve with unwavering vigilance. The depot stretched out before her, vast and silent, a testament to her dedication. Emily walked her patrol one final time, every step precise, every inspection meticulous, her mind clear and her heart steady. She had embraced her role, accepted her responsibility, and internalized the truth. Heroism often comes quietly, in the diligence of those who guard, protect, and ensure the safety of others from the shadows. Emily Torres, once alone and uncertain, now stood fully realized, a soldier acknowledged, a lifesaver, and the unwavering guardian of the night.